Again, my name is Chris Capozzola. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Open Learning, and I'm very excited to be bringing us to our next panel on reinventing teaching practice. And this is a really important moment for thinking about teaching as many things, right? It is an art, it is a science, it is a craft, it is a joy, it is a burden, it is all of those things at the same time. It is fundamentally a practice, and that is what our session is going to be doing today. And joining us for this are some amazing perspectives on the teaching experience from across MIT, from 4 brilliant MIT colleagues who together bring years of experience as educators, as scholars, and as practitioners at the cutting edge of teaching, of technology and education. I am going to just briefly introduce the 4 of them in a row, and then I'm going to sort of turn it over to them to speak. We've had some, as you know, this is a new space and we're experimenting. We've had some feedback from people in the back of the room that it can sometimes be hard to see the speakers. So some of them may stand up, some of them may walk around. We'll be doing some experimenting with teaching even this morning as we do that. And so joining us from left to right, Eric Klopfer, a professor of education, director of the Scheller Teacher Education Program here at MIT. And then we'll hear from Melissa Webster, a lecturer in managerial communication at the Sloan School of Management. Then we will hear from Durk England, arrived just-in-time delivery. Thank you for joining us, an associate professor in electrical engineering and computer science, and from Janet Rankin, the director of MIT's Teaching and Learning Lab. I'm going to ask each of them to speak for no more than 5 minutes in turn. Then I may ask 1 or 2 questions to get the conversation going more sort of organically, and then again we'll leave some time at the end for people to come up to the microphones for 1 or 2 questions at the end. But with that, let me ask Eric. Take it away.
Sure, I'll try standing up. Thanks, Chris. So just a little bit about the work that I've been involved in here at MIT, and a lot of other folks in the room as well, who have already talked this morning, but not about this specific work. And then I'll talk a little bit about the sort of ways we sort of see teachers sort of playing an important role in the future of AI in learning. So the big project I'm involved in is an initiative led by Cynthia, along with Hal and myself, called RAISE, Responsible AI for Social Empowerment and Education. We focus a lot on empowering kids to do innovative, creative things with AI technologies. It's a lot in the spirit of the conversation that Justin and Mitch were involved in this morning, and sort of thinking about constructionist ways to involve kids in creating things and sharing things and doing things with AI. We see this primarily happening through classrooms. It's for also, I think it was Randy this morning that mentioned, like, for the sort of with the lens of equity, kids go through classrooms. It's where we have responsible adults to sort of work with kids. So we sort of see classrooms as a really important gateway for empowering kids to do this. And through that, then we need to sort of think about ways we prepare teachers to do that. What are the skills that they need to do that effectively with their own students? And so we focus a lot on the curriculum and the professional development of those teachers. We work with tools like MIT Scratch, App Inventor, and other sort of platforms to help kids build things and share things and do things that we think are empowering in their own communities. We developed the curriculum to support the teachers and to support their own professional learning as well. This is not sort of teachers as sort of just a gateway to students, but as professionals themselves who need to understand this technology. We have one large initiative that some people may have heard of. It's called Day of AI. Day of AI supports teachers K through 12 in implementing AI activities in their classrooms for a day, although it's really more like a week of activities that we've designed. It's really from K through 12. All throughout. This is not just for computer teachers or technology teachers. It's for teachers in all disciplines for them to use various forms of AI in the classroom, sometimes without computers. So there's a module where they help learn about large language models through activities in the classroom that don't use any computers. There's other activities that sort of use computers to explore AI, and other tools like as I mentioned, like things like Scratch and App Inventor, where they can actually build things and share things as a part of that experience. But that's a way of, it's a global project at this point, used by thousands of teachers and schools around the world. It's going to be in its 3rd year this spring. We're now working on an effort to directly support teachers in their own professional learning through online professional development to really help teachers understand how they can use AI, both in their own professional practice. Is it about creating curriculum, preparing curriculum, refining things, communicating with their students, or is it about sort of using AI in the classroom directly with their own students? You've heard a little bit this morning about sort of the concerns of cheating that a lot of teachers have. We're trying to sort of flip that conversation around. Instead of focusing on the problems of cheating, because we think that's going to be sort of a never-ending battle where we don't sort of see tools to detect cheating as sort of being a future of learning. We really think about it as a way of sort of fundamentally rethinking what students need to be learning in the classroom. So we want them to think about what do students need to know? How do we know that they know those things? And does AI, the presence of AI, actually change what we need them to know? As Justin, I think, mentioned this morning, it's really changing what we might think about as sort of the learning outcomes for a lot of students. And we want to think about how we can actually reassess what we want students to learn and think about how we assess what they learn on the other side of that. I do want to offer a sort of a third perspective. So Mitch and Justin this morning mentioned sort of this sort of instructionist approach, which is the tutors and things like that. I think we'll see a lot of those, regardless of whether we think that they're useful or not. I think in some cases they probably are. We need to really understand what they do, but there's going to be a lot of, I think, push towards that. We have the constructionist approach, which I've talked about those we use, and is something that we really sort of endorse and sort of advance here at MIT. But there's sort of a third way, which is maybe sort of, I think, a lot of what we heard about the tools from the demos, the brief demos we just saw, as well as OpenAI, sorry, mispronounced that, which is really sort of creative experiences that we can sort of make with AI and move into the classroom. And I think that's actually a really sort of positive way that we might see a lot of change. I don't see this as primarily a technological problem, and in fact, in ed tech, we often sort of think about these problems as technological problems, but they're really design problems. And we have to think about how do we design experiences to be able to have students have these creative experiences in their classrooms? How do we empower teachers to do that? How do we empower teachers to share that with other teachers who don't feel like they can develop those things themselves? So it's really about sort of creating that both sort of design spirit amongst a larger community, as well as thinking about a way of sharing that. And then it's also about then sharing the best practices. I think we're not going to find that like AI works or AI doesn't work, or AI works for physics or doesn't work for physics. It's going to be about who does it work for, in what circumstances, under what conditions, and what subjects. It's going to be very much more nuanced. And so we need to work as a larger community with teachers, with researchers, with professionals to think about how do we develop those sort of, I won't call them best practices, but at least good practices that we can share with other people and really have some sort of more informed experience base that we can use to sort of inform what we're doing in classrooms. We don't expect teachers to do this on their own. We sort of think about this as a larger community. And I hope at MIT, where we're sort of like a beacon for a lot of this work, that we can sort of help propel that work forward. Thanks.
Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Webster, a lecturer at Sloan, and I teach 2 CIM classes, communication for the intensive for the major, management communication, and then also communicating with data. And for those of you familiar with CIM courses, they're very intensive for writing and oral communication. Somewhere in January, I realized, this is going to have, this being ChatGPT, it's going to have a large impact on the work that students would be doing in my classes. And furthermore, it pushed me to think about, well, what is the workplace that I am preparing my students for? And my early assessment of this was, for them to be competitive in the workplace, for them to be effective, they're going to need to know how to use these tools. We also had a CIM faculty meeting at the end of January where one of my main takeaways is I do not want to be in the game of chasing cheaters. That sounds miserable. That really sounds miserable. So between thinking about my objectives, thinking about that much, and that by the time fall rolled around, things would be more advanced, I decided I need to implement something this semester, that being the spring. Even though that was approximately February 6th when I made that decision, I decided I've got to figure out how to work this in somehow. So what I did in the spring semester, which I think of as my first set of experiment, I took an existing assignment, threw it out, and said, create a cover letter using ChatGPT. Right? Don't modify whatever the output is. I want you to see how far you can get with ChatGPT on creating this cover letter. So they were doing this assignment. I think they turned it in at the beginning of April. Then I took the set of cover letters, turned it back to them, and said, critique these, and write an email to your hypothetical manager about what quality you see in these cover letters, and then a little bit about how you think generative AI is going to play out in this hypothetical situation. You're a new graduate in your job. So we did that. We discussed it some in class. I then brought in a panel to talk about ChatGPT, how they were seeing it in the workplace. One of my learnings is that generally I saw the students who got the best cover letter out of ChatGPT were those who were the best writers in the class. So that was one early learning. Okay, so then summer, I stumbled into this idea of having 5 UROPs work with me on looking into ChatGPT, where we sort of went and explored a whole bunch of different areas, other generative AI as well. One of them, she couldn't make her one of our team meetings, and she sent her video avatar to give her presentation that week. Yes, I watched on Zoom. Everyone on Zoom just went, right? So that was the summer, lots of learning there. They were also great for being able to bounce ideas off of. For my 3rd set of experiments going into the fall, and that class being communicating with data, where it's currently happening, so the students are required to use ChatGPT or other generative AI on every assignment. They get to decide how to use it, right? I kept my rubrics the same, at least in this current experiment, because I think my standards of what makes good output has not changed. And they also have to submit it to a survey that says, here's how I used it, what worked well, what didn't work well, what I learned, and here's the link to my thread. So that has been great in getting insight into what they're doing and sort of counters some theories. Ethan Mollick, I'm certainly a big fan of Ethan Mollick. However, I think some people are more natural at learning how to use this technology than others. And so I'm seeing that, students are starting to pick up some things, but not everybody is sort of learning quickly on it. The other experiment this fall is I'm having them use ChatGPT to create synthetic data for one of their projects so that they can incorporate consumer data into the project. Normally, there's no scope for them to be able to go source that kind of data. So going into the spring semester, so now my sort of 4th set of experiments, and this is a chance for me to think in a much more kind of integrated way about how the communication principles that I'm teaching them, how those can actually be enhanced by interacting with these tools. And I liked what David said earlier about the most important thing is being able to tell what's wrong and how to fix it. And I'm very excited about when we sort of shift away from the mechanics of writing an oral presentation, when the tool can be used as an assistant for more of those, how can we use it to evaluate, have I picked the right strategy? So I'm hoping to spend more time analyzing the scenarios and say, okay, really, what makes sense for this audience? What's the right thing to communicate for this audience? So I'm thrilled about that opportunity to really move higher up in Bloom's taxonomy and to be more strategic. Yeah? So I think there's a potential to advance their communication abilities through doing this. And the three takeaways I would say are to really think about your objectives, both the long term in terms of students in the workplace and then the objectives of particular assignments. If my objective is for them to produce good writing, how much of it do they actually need to learn to produce it themselves versus evaluate their writing assistant to be able to produce good writing? Because that is in fact how they're going to be judged in the workplace. The workplace isn't going to say, well, I'm really glad you thought every single sentence through yourself. Like, no, get me the frickin' thing that we need to use and move on with our jobs, right? So the objectives, and then thinking also about really what makes sense for assessment and how do I tell if they've actually accomplished those objectives. And third, I liked the quote earlier about that a step change of 20 years actually is incremental improvement, that finding things to work on. It hit me the other day, as a teacher, you can't make this jump in one day. You can't make it in one round of like, oh, this is how to entirely revamp my course. No, I'm going to be doing more significant revamping for this spring, but I'm not going to hit the mark. I'm not going to hit the mark. It's going to take multiple times.
All right, thank you. Dirk, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Durk England. I'm on the faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and I'm a member of the Research Laboratory of Electronics, where I lead a group that builds quantum computers and AI accelerators, actually. So I've actually been working on the hardware that should power perhaps the next generations of AI tools for the last, I don't know, 7 or so years. Some of my students started companies in this area. In the AI space, Light Matter is one company that's trying to make accelerated tools for training large language models and other neural networks. And I rushed over here, and I made it just in time, because actually I just came from a class that we just started, a series of classes actually in teaching to students quantum technologies, computers, quantum networks, quantum sensors, and so on. And we actually still believe very much in analog teaching. That's why I had to run over here, analog myself, because we're doing a lot of actually this Blackboard, still Blackboard teaching, because there's a lot of really, I think, learning still by imitation or by following along, writing on paper, and so on. But there are other places where I think AI can really be fantastically helpful. And an example of that is the lectures that we have in this multi-part series should stay concurrent and cohesive and internally consistent. So if you want to do, for example, if you want to change the notation of the math earlier maybe in a class, then that actually has a ripple effect throughout. So then oftentimes you're thinking, okay, this would be the right thing to do, but I just can't do it because there's not enough time. But so one of the things that motivated me into using large language models is that you could perhaps automate that, right? And so you can keep your lectures cohesive, coherent, and current more easily. And so actually, in November of last year, and I can't believe that it's only just over 12 months ago, I started playing, like many of you probably, with ChatGPT, and then taught myself how to use these agents, something called LangChain, where you program a local agent, and this agent has some retrieval augmented generation with which it basically can access a database. For me, that database was the first part of the series of lecture courses, Quantum Computing and Communications Laboratory from the spring semester, and I embedded that large language model into it. And so it served as a situation aware. It would look where the student is sort of scrolling on a website, and it's situation aware tutor, right? And so actually that later garnered quite a lot of interest amongst young motivated people, in particular Hunter Kemeny, who is doing an exhibit here of the tool that we then subsequently developed through the summer and the fall semester also with MIT undergraduates, and that tool is very, very useful, and they got a really good reception from students in that it has a very low error rate of telling you the answer to a problem. And big part of that is that it knows where the student is looking, so it's a lot of context, and it knows the content of the overall lecture. So it's really fascinating, and it's really compelling 90% of the time, because 90% of the time gives you a perfectly good answer, and 10% of the time it gives you a not good answer, a incorrect answer, in fact. And in physics, which is basically applied math in our stuff, it's known to be wrong answer. There's no shades of gray. It's just wrong. And you don't know which one is which. So it's like a little bit of playing Russian roulette if you use this tool, right? So actually, I have been obsessing for the last 6 months or so about trying to make these tools truthful, okay? So rather than to go from a question directly to the answer, to try to go from the question to a truthful reasoning kernel. Okay, so that kernel should write code, and it does. It writes code, so it's verifiable. It keeps a record of what it's doing, and then the LLM again acts as an interpreter to take the output of that code, which it checks against self-simulation. In some cases, you might see some of that Hunter is doing, So it actually simulates, it checks against its own worldview to some extent. It's very limited still, but nonetheless, we were able to beat the error rate, the hallucination rate to near zero. And I think an important part of that, why we can perhaps solve hallucination in physics and math is because we know the truth. Given the input conditions, okay, basically what it says is, these are what I thought you mean. This is what I think you're saying. That's your input, x. And then we map to f of x. And that map is known to be a truthful function. I mean, it's assuming that physics is correct, laws of physics. And so that I think is maybe a distinguishing feature. And so recently, and this is just my last point here, we've been working a lot with a team of developers, hunters, and other colleagues, Marin Solticic in particular, I should mention, and joined by other members of the MIT community and broader, Jeremy Wertheimer, to actually see if we can go beyond these initial steps and actually make not artificial intelligence, where the I is something I still don't quite understand. And in fact, because we don't understand the intelligence in artificial intelligence, I would actually propose that we call it unintelligible artificial intelligence, UAI. We want to make something inside. Let's just forget about this, philosophical stuff about intelligence, whatever. I would just call it an automated, interpretable reasoning engine. Okay, so we've been working on this kind of AIR thing for the last 6 or so months, and happy to talk more about that here and later. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everybody. I'm Janet Reagan, Director of the Teaching and Learning Lab. And so, am I screaming? Sorry, I'm used to trying to project. So we work with people who teach here at MIT, who teach undergrads and graduate students here at MIT. And so that's my audience, and that's my perspective for what I'm going to talk about. I just want to do a quick poll. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and leave your hands up. I'm going to ask 3 questions. So who's teaching now? However you want to define teaching. Who's teaching next semester? Leave your hands up. So I just want to see. OK, so of those of you who, hands up, please. OK, anybody who has taught recently, leave your hands up. Great. And then have you done something, either modified your assignments, your assessments, your goals for teaching to address, accommodate, leverage generative AI? Leave your hands up if you're doing that. OK, good. I mean, it's a somewhat self-selective audience, so it's great. It's great that that's there. So this is my context. Am I blocking the slides? Sorry. And this is just a little bit of. I think it's good I went last, because hopefully it kind of wraps up a bit of what everybody else was saying. I mean, so much of what Mitch and Justin said has resonated. What Eric said, what Melissa said. And what Dirk said, I mean, and hopefully I can give you kind of a way to wrap your heads around it if you haven't already. And this is a famous methodology or way of thinking about designing your class, and it's called backward design after Wiggins and McTighe back in 2005. And so it's basically rethink your goals. I mean, they say define your goals, revise your assessments and assignments to accommodate those goals, and then redesign the way you teach and the learning activities that students engage in order to promote those goals. So with respect to generative AI, what we need to do is we need to think about, first of all, you need to use generative AI. You need to roll up your sleeves, get dirty, find out what it does, find out what it does to your problem sets, find out what it does to your writing prompts, figure out what it does, and then say, OK, now that I know what it does, are my goals still valid? Are my goals for what I think people should learn, are they still valid? And if not, and as Melissa said, if ChatGPT can do your assignment, then maybe you should rethink your assignment. And maybe not. I don't want to get into a fight with anybody, but maybe that's an opportunity for you to say, you know what? It can do this calculation. It can do this. It can write this. So what can students do that's more interesting, that's at a higher level of cognitive processing, that gets at things like synthesizing, evaluating, analyzing, creating, rather than remembering, let's say. So once you know what generative AI can do, think about what you want students to do. What do experts in your field do? What's important in your discipline, as others have said? And then say, all right, I'm probably going to have to revise my assignment in order to accommodate that or avoid that or whatever it is, wherever you are. And you may actually find it easier to start with that revising your assignment part, to look at your assignments, look at what generative AI is doing to your assignments, with your assignments, and then say, all right, I'm going to ask something else. But ask yourself why you bothered asking that in the first place. Why did you use this? Why was this such a great assignment? Why was it so important to you? And then start kind of taking things apart from there. So that's the middle part. And then the other thing is redesigning how you teach. And so this idea of sort of delivery versus constructivism, right? Instructivism versus constructivism. And there's some really interesting work. One thing is how can you, as the instructor, use generative AI to improve your teaching? So the Maliks, who we have both praised and maligned over the course of this morning, have written this great paper on how to use basically concepts from the science of learning, how to use generative AI to employ the science of learning in your teaching. So what can it do for you? So one example is it can generate lots of examples in lots of different contexts, which we know is really important for learners. If you want a learner to learn something, you give them lots of different examples from different contexts, and that helps them clarify the concept. So that's something from the science of learning. It can generate quick multiple choice questions, quick clicker questions, whatever it is. Those are a pain in the neck to develop, really. If you have a class and you have to come up with a couple questions every class, and you're teaching 3 days a week, that's a lot of questions. So maybe ask generative AI to come up with some of those questions. Now, as everybody has said, you can't just do the questions and walk into your class. You're going to have to think about that. But how can you use it? How can you use it to help students then practice retrieval? They're answering a question, which means they have to go back into their memory banks, find the answer, and commit to it in that particular situation. That's a known strategy for promoting student learning. So mud cards. Anybody use mud cards at the end of class? 1-minute papers, like what did you learn today? Right? So if you have a big class, you have 100 students, and you have them do mud cards, distilling that information is kind of, so have them do it electronically and throw it into ChatGPT and have it summarize it. Again, I wouldn't just believe it, but it's a big help, right? So there's things that how it can help you, and there's other examples. And then finally, maybe it's time to start thinking about the format of your classroom. What are students doing when they're in the classroom with you, the expert? And can they be engaging with materials in real time and in ways that more mimic the way experts in the field work or think? And so going to a more active, constructivist experience in the classroom can kind of pull some of that fear of cheating and fear of using it in the wrong way, whatever, can kind of alleviate some of that. I don't know how long I talked to because I forgot to turn my timer on, but I'll stop now.
All right, so thanks, Janet, and the entire panel. What we're going to do now, I'm just going to briefly give maybe one question to the whole panel, or as many of them want to answer it, and then I want to make sure that we have some time for questions and answers from the audience. So if you do have questions that you want to get on the queue, you might want to start moving to the microphones now. And I want to actually just frame this, first of all, around the question. Let me put it this way. We've heard from, in this panel and all morning, about two different things. One is generative AI and the curriculum for particular teachers, but also generative AI as the curriculum, right? As the thing that whatever we teach, we also now have to teach, right? Whether it's physics or history or third grade English, right? And so, sort of what are in your view, what are the responsibilities and also opportunities for teaching practice for AI as the curriculum? And that's open to anyone who wants to take this on. Eric, why don't you start?
So I think the specific technology is new that we're sort of thinking about this context in, but that idea is something that's not new. The idea of like media literacies is something that we've tried to think about teaching for at least the last 20 years or more. Internet media more generally, even longer than that. in many cases we've struggled to figure out ways to do that. But in many cases teachers have figured out how to do that. And I think it's got to be about context. And it isn't. There may not be a general media literacy that you can teach. You teach about it. I need to teach about it in my social studies class. I need to teach about it in my math class. I need to teach about it in my science class, because in each case it's contextualized. And the same thing needs to go for AI. So that means using it in each of these cases and then sort of thinking about its responsible use. And there may be some general principles that you can sort of teach. I'll just relate. Some of you may have seen this. There's some Instagram feeds out there where faculty and teachers sort of post papers that have been generated by AI that turn it in their classes. And if you write a prompt, you usually say, like, pretend you're a student in a class and you're writing a paper about blah, and the student will copy and paste, and it says, pretending I'm a student in a class, here's what I would write. And so you need at least enough literacy to know that. That's probably general, but most of the other stuff is much more specific than that.
So I see successful use of this as the combination of three things. Well, four. One is around problem definition and identifying specific tasks. Another is your domain knowledge, and then your sort of ability to give good instructions, and lastly, your ability to evaluate the output, and then all of that cycles, of course. And for somebody teaching communication, that's very exciting, because that's in fact what you should be doing, is for effective communication. So for my class, it's certainly, there's good synthesis there. I think to generalize that, I think those things still apply, because the intersection of the domain knowledge and how to use the tool is fundamental to good use here. And that idea of the problem identification and then the problem formulation and the specific tasks of how to use it, that can be domain specific as well. And an area I see that is a big opportunity for everybody is to get better at problem definition and identifying specific tasks, because often I have not been able to insert as much of this into my fall semester as I would like, but I have tried to give students guidance on, you could use it for this, you could use it for this, you could use it for this, because people start out with sometimes too narrow of an idea of what they could use. And so those are ways that I have found the curriculum and the technology intersecting.
I can speak to that a bit. So I think probably the central thing that I would add here is that it helps us think about, and it helps students in particular think about trusting in sources, or distinguishing trustworthy statements, truth, from ones that aren't. And in particular, I mentioned, of course, that so in our work, for example, like you're given a problem statement mathematically, and you have to then maybe turn the crank on the some theorems and so forth to derive the answer. And so given the input problem, we know we can prove the output problem, okay? And so like large language models don't operate that way. Instead, let's say there's sort of three classes, I would say. One is you ask a question and then it just answers with some answer. Let's say if I throw the ball in this direction at this velocity, then it'll land there. Okay, so I have to trust it, but how do I verify it? Well, I could ask it to write computer code that verifies it. I could copy, paste it, and run it in Python or something like this, and I can see, okay, that's truthful, but I can't necessarily trust the large language model because it's throughout, right? Whereas the third one is you can map to something where a function that you know to be truthful. And I think these are sort of like the three classes of trustworthiness that we work with. And I think the large language model and stuff like this recent AI resolution has helped bring that to the forefront. And obviously, truthfulness has also broader societal implications. It makes us think about that.
I don't know if I have anything to add. Again, it's a slightly different perspective, but I think for you all in your disciplines, you do want to think about, like, is this something that people in my discipline are going to be using? And then do I have somewhat of a responsibility to help my students be able to work with it, interact with it, use it in a way that's intelligent and thoughtful, and that doesn't kind of lead to additional problems, ambiguities, misconceptions. So I think everybody has to make that decision, and if it is, then I would say, as the director of the Teaching and Learning Lab, make it an explicit learning outcome. Like, by the end of this class, you will be able to use generative AI to do X, Y, or Z, if that's important to you. But it can be an individual decision based on your field or your course.
Yeah, I think that, and again, and we'll get to questions in 1 second. I think that's a crucial point of making it explicit, because otherwise you end up with it's implicit or a hidden curriculum, right? And we do have to remember that, you know, the students, especially those of us who are teaching at MIT, you know, we're encountering students who've been learners for at least 18 years of their lives, right? But they will have used these technologies in different ways with different access to them. We heard about access earlier this morning, with different, you know, sort of comfort levels, et cetera. And so we need to kind of basically understand where our students are with them and teach to that, or else, you know, we're sort of hiding the curriculum for another generation, right? Okay, so we have a question at the microphone. We had one person lined up there. And then if there are others, go from there. And again, just make your question as brief and direct as possible. Mike.
Yeah, in all this conversation about reinventing the teaching practice and using AI as like a learning assistant, I just keep thinking, what's going to happen to our TAs? And those people who often fill the tutoring roles in our classes. And so I would just love to hear how you see this changing their roles, and if you predict that, like, will there be less TA opportunities across higher ed because we have AI who can make it faster? Yeah.
My TA becomes more valuable because their experience of the world and helping students understand the context for the problem they're trying to define, and then evaluating the output, all becomes more useful. And if I can free them up, maybe if I can figure out how to use AI to take away some of the TA's tasks, then I can use more of that evaluative, strategic, context setting, social aspects there. That's my hope.
Great, thank you. Yeah, briefly, Eric.
I think it relates to a change in assessment as well. I won't go into a long story that I've told other folks here, but I've been involved in courses where you know, the exams consist of oral exams with TAs. It's a great way to sort of have conversations, to really understand what students know. It's very authentic. It's very personal. You really understand what students know. And I think sort of thinking about ways where TAs play that kind of role, both in sort of formative as well as summative assessment, can, I think, really change their role and make them hugely valuable in a classroom.
I'd like to second, especially what Melissa was just saying. I can see that if we, like, for example, a lot of the monotony of TAing can be, a lot of that can be automated so that the TAs can spend their time more valuable and they really can become more effective, especially as we started to convert lectures from different formats into interpretable formats, actually Python-based, in particular Jupyter Notebook-based, and this is something that Hunter has been spearheading there. You can do a lot more proof checking, error checking, and stuff like this automatically, and it really sort of empowers, I think, humans to spend their time more creatively, I suppose, or interacting with. So, like, I'd say a greater percentage of their time is spent interacting with the actual students than doing busy work. That's probably the main thing.
Fantastic points. Let's get at least we'll try to get at least one more question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I just wanted to ask, knowing that we're talking about the teaching practice here and thinking about how when we think about teacher education, both at K-12 and at the university level, there's already some sort of resistance moving towards a constructionist attitude. Could anybody on that panel maybe speak to advice that you would give and encouraging educators to embrace this way of thinking? Because we know there's some sort of resistance in changing practice in general. What sort of steps did you all take in thinking about that?
Maybe from Janet. Yeah.
Just that, you know, we know lots of things about how people learn and how people learn effectively and robustly. and better. I don't know, whatever that means. But and most of those things involve students constructing meaning from information that they have, whether it's information we gave them or information they collected themselves. And so, I really think we need to start being honest with ourselves that there's a whole discipline out there, the science of learning, and cognitive research, and we can leverage that in order to have better learning experiences for people. It's a slow road. People, tradition is a hard thing to break, but that if we really want people to learn, they have to be using information, they have to be applying information, they have to be evaluating things, and that's what we all have to do as humans. We're always going to have to do that, and I think that's my lever anyway. But
in K-12 education, we have to change assessment.
yeah, right.
All right. I know there's more questions. I wish we could cover all of them. Let's just give a big round of thanks to our panelists.